Hello, protocols, packets, and programs. Welcome to October, when tales of terror become timely and horror marks our days to Halloween. When we look to version control for safety but feel that tinge of dread as seeing a branch with a force push or encountering a detached head. We can try to revert to restore to stash, but nothing will cast out a haunted SHA hash. So this month when running the Git CLI, be cautious of things that cause hell to stop by. Which means this week we chat with Janet Worthington about what makes a DevSecOps approach succeed and why many vendors have trouble shifting focus when they're trying to shift everyone else left. In the news segment, curl set sights on a high severity patch, glibc sets some loony tunables, ShellTorch sets insecure defaults, another top 10 list, and more. Don't fear the repo, and stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals.
It's the show to learn the latest tools and techniques to understand DevOps, applications, and the cloud. Your trusted source for the latest AppSec news. It's time for Application Security Weekly.
Business Security Weekly is recorded on Mondays at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Each week, we address the challenges facing CISOs through our guest interviews, including former and active CISOs. Our news segment is focused on leadership and communication to better help security leaders translate and communicate security risks into business risks. Jason Albuquerque, Ben Carr, Tyler Robinson, and others add their expertise to the conversation. I'm Matt Alderman, and I hope you search for Business Security Weekly in your favorite podcast catcher and subscribe to download our latest content.
This is episode 258, recorded October 9th, 2023. I'm your host, Mike Shima, and I'm here with John Kinsella. Hello, Mr. Kinsella.
Mr. Shima, I was having a perfectly fine morning until you mentioned another top 10 list.
Oh, hang in there. It's scary. It's the month of Halloween. It seems topical. What isn't scary is that we are celebrating the milestone of reaching over 1,000 members of our CISO community. The Cybersecurity Collaboration Forum is a one-stop shop for executive collaboration comprised of CISOs across various industries. If you want to be part of this growing community of CISOs, join us as a member or technology partner. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/cybersecurity collaboration. Janet Worthington is a senior analyst for security and risk at Forrester. Janet covers product security, software supply chain, open source security, and DevSecOps. Janet's background is in product management and application security. Hello, Janet. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mike, and it's nice to see you and John again.
It is. It was back in episode 213, I believe. Good auspicious number, 13. That was almost a year ago. We chatted with you about education and application, especially education in universities, which I know is something that John also likes to talk about as well. But I think this time around, we want to perhaps continue education, but there's also some waves we want to ride, which maybe aren't quite topical. I'm not sure about that metaphor for Halloween, but tools and DevSecOps and getting away from just vulns. But let's actually start talking about vulns, perhaps, and the waves that you've been working on recently.
Yeah, sure. So for the past couple months, we have been working on two waves, which is basically what we do is we look at the market and then we talk to different vendors, their customer references, and then we kind of see who's differentiating in different areas of that market. So I had two this year. So I put out a software composition analysis wave. And, as you guys know, SCA kind of helps you understand the open source libraries and third-party dependencies that you're pulling into your applications, as well as the license risks. And now more of them are doing open source health. And then I did a static application security testing wave. Some of the same vendors, which is definitely interesting. But as you know, static's been around forever, and it kind of helps you understand the vulnerabilities and, a top 10, of course. It looks at some of the OWASP top 10 in your own code. So it was cool because I got to see not just, securing your application and securing the dependencies that you are pulling in, but really we're seeing these vendors trying to do more and really look at the whole ecosystem of these applications and sort of the software supply chain that goes into them.
So a lot of this is you're talking both to the vendors, understand what they're doing, as well as security teams. I'm curious, how much have you also talked to that developer side? Because we say DevSecOps, if we're going to start out with dev, how much have devs been part of this conversation or attention even from the vendors?
That is a great question. I would say, so first to kind of start off, one thing we look at is who's the buyer, who's buying these tools, because sometimes that can give us an idea of what the priorities are going to be for the tools, what the requirements are going to be. And what we saw this year, Sandy Carielli, who is one of my colleagues and I know has been on a number of times.
Good friend.
Yes. She and I did something called the State of Application Security. We do it every year. And, what we ask is we ask security professionals, we say, who is the main decision maker? And who holds the budget for application security tools? And what's interesting is that, now this is security answering this, they said 54% said that the development team is the one who makes the main decision. They are the final decision makers. And 34% said not only are they the final decision makers, but development holds the budget for application security. Now, if you think about that, if you were to rewind, 10, 15 years ago, I don't think we would have seen that. I don't think we would have seen developers. Mike, you have a little friend in the background, which is adorable. Perfect timing for Halloween. Black cat. I don't think we would have seen that, but I think now there is not only an awareness from, developers, development teams of the importance of doing DevSecOps, but also I think the tools have kind of clicked and said, okay, we really need to support developer productivity. And that means a couple of things. We can't take forever to find, to do a security scan. We need to make sure that we're delivering results where developers can get them. And we really need to focus the development time. So I think, there's a kind of a long way to answer your question, but I think developers are, they're involved in the purchasing decisions now. And I think the tools have started to say, hey, we need to really cater to this. And I think part of this, why we've seen this too, is I think there have been tools who are more developer tools who said, hey, we're already in your development pipeline. In many cases, we are your development pipeline. Let's see if we can offer you security tools. And I think that actually helped to build awareness with developers when you have, the DevOps pipeline that you're using saying, hey, we can throw security in here for you. Would you want to do that? So I think there's been, a number of reasons, but I do think developers are much more involved in the discussion. And I think DevSecOps as a topic has really kind of come along in the past couple of years.
That seems, you've enumerated a couple of reasons why it seems beneficial for developers to have that decision or hold the budget, since they can influence what that tool does, meaning actually make the tool useful for me, make it part of what tools I'm already using. I'm curious, have you seen vendors fully being successful in that translation, or are vendors kind of still missing the boat and just ripping off the security tag and putting the developer tag on it and selling the same thing?
Yeah, so we definitely saw the latter. A lot more of that a couple years ago, I think, when Sandy did both of these waves. It was kind of like the, hey, we cater to developers, and really you're like, well, just because you have a plugin to a CI/CD pipeline doesn't make you DevSecOps. So I think a lot of the vendors have learned from that, but I think there are some who have sort of a competitive differentiator there because they're already in the pipeline. So you see there are CI/CD pipeline tools out there that are offering it. There are binary repositories. They've started offering these types of tools. You've seen some of these vendors try to say, hey, we're not even going to try and take what we were using before that really catered towards security and try and retrofit it in. We're going to try and like start from scratch and have sort of our own, DevSecOps, or, maybe it's the same underlying engine, but, how we're using it, what we're doing with it is more for that, fast feedback in the IDE, on your pull requests. And so I think we're seeing that. And I think one of the nice things that we're also seeing to help with the developer productivity is really this idea around remediation and prioritization. I think one of the complaints that I hear, and I'm sure you guys have been there, is somebody turned on XYZ SCA tool, and now we have hundreds of vulnerabilities in our backlog. Mm-hmm. And developers will tell me that. And they're like, what do? I also have to code my new features. And I think what we're seeing is these tools are like, wait a minute. We can't just start spitting out vulnerabilities at you. We have to prioritize them. And so what they're trying to do is these tools are trying to use different signals about whether it's your code itself, whether it's other types of tools working together, like software composition analysis working in tandem with static analysis, or even some of them are trying to pull in information about your deployment in production. Like, what does your cloud infrastructure look like? Are all these things locked down such that, you can't really get to this vulnerability? So let's deprioritize that, and let's prioritize the ones that are going to cause the most harm to you in production. And so I think some of them are doing better than others, obviously, but I do think there's more of an awareness of like, hey, developers don't have a lot of time. What are you going to tell? If they have like 5 minutes, what are you going to tell them to fix? And so I think that's really helped. And I think also only showing developers what they introduced. And I think that's definitely newer. So don't show me every single issue that's in this application when you run, when I'm, in my CI/CD pipeline. Show me what I just introduced with this pull request. What am I really responsible for? And I think that has also helped to kind of help with that developer productivity of really focusing them on what, they have done. And, later on in the life cycle before you go to production, yes, you might have to stop the build if, there's still some big issue in it. But when developers are working and they're trying to go fast, on code reviews, you don't tell the developer, hey, guess what? Like, so-and-so has checked something else in down the line, and now we're telling you about this. No, with a code review, you're saying, hey, this is the code you're checking in now. This is what you introduce. This is what you need to fix. And I think these tools, these static and these software composition analysis tools are trying to follow along there.
It took some folks a while to figure that out, right? Because the way that I usually use the phrase, the chess engine, as it sort of figures out the pass through for your sources and sinks of at least input coming into these things, it can be complex to figure out, okay, well, you've changed line 45, but the change you've made there has had like some sort of, you've sort of unlocked the puzzle pieces for like lines 15, 32, and 63, and now we have a vulnerability. So I can sort of see to a way while that's going on, but at the end of the day, yeah, you care about what you've changed. And it's funny, I've been thinking the last week or two on this. I use OneNote for that's my place where I keep my brain. And it has that spell checker in there. And like, if I'm taking notes, I'm not writing English and I'm not writing, like flowery prose. I'm writing notes. But that's sort of the space my brain is in. And it starts underlining, like squiggly lining things, which are like spelling check mistakes for like something I don't care about, totally distracts me. So I can really get a sense for like how if you're like trying to hack out some code really quickly, try and get something done, it's one of however many things you've got, and suddenly it goes, ha, I found something. Yeah, that'd drive people nuts, right? So I can see why that balance is heading back towards developers. I'm a little surprised it hasn't happened sooner, but it'll be interesting to see how it keeps going, hopefully.
I think to your point, I think there's been a shift in the industry, at least from what I'm seeing. And it used to be, and I'd be interested because I know you guys have been in this space for a long time as well. There used to be this we have to find everything mentality. Right. if we don't find every single, and it wasn't just critical issue, it was critical, mediums, highs, blah, 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 and you had application security engineers who were the ones running the tools, right? And they could figure out, wait a minute, I'm pretty sure there should have been this other, this other issue. You didn't find this one issue, but you found all these others, but you didn't find this one issue. And I think with developers now owning more of the budget, owning more of the decision, we're moving away from we have to boil the ocean to if people aren't fixing these issues, if people aren't learning, to your point, like if they're tuning out these tools because they're so noisy, they're going to just shut them off, that does no one any good. And now the pendulum has switched to we need to make sure that we're only showing the most important issues and that they're actionable and that we give developers the information they need to fix them.
I like that approach too, because one of the things you mentioned was, security vendors just trying to label themselves. We do DevSecOps now, but it's a label switch. It wasn't a behavior switch. I think here there's an aspect that AppSec, as you mentioned, for 20 years or more, has just been preoccupied with. We can finding vulns is what we do and fixing them, and that's how we measure because they're just it's numbers. It's out there. It's something we can see. But to me, that AppSec approach is just so it hasn't worked very well for the long time, and it's just so boring. So if we see developers, for example, getting more influence, getting more budget, they're not ignorant of security. So my question here is, what should that AppSec security try to refocus on? How do we get rid of the AppSec that just says we are all about vulns and replace it with something else that still is a forward-looking security vision?
Yeah, I think a couple things happen when we see organizations that go to DevSecOps and sort of the next leap after that, which we call secure what you sell. We really see security become it becomes an enabler. It doesn't become an obstacle. The security and the security team, it kind of moves away from that scan and scold. They become more of a partner to developers. And I think that's easy to say, but I think it's very hard to do in practice, right? Because as security, you still want to make sure, nobody wants on their watch there to be an application, to be a breach because of an application issue, right? You don't want that. But at the same time, we know, like to your point, what we've been doing hasn't been working. And so spitting out thousands and thousands of vulnerabilities that nobody ever looks at, that just go into some backlog, that doesn't work. That's the old way of doing things. And so I think we see this like sort of balance or this adjustment between security having to let go a little bit and say, you know what? Like, I'm going to give developer these tools early on in the life cycle. I'm not going to tell them about everything. I'm going to let them decide if they're going to fix it or not. We're not going to break the build on, their pull requests. But then later on in the life cycle, we still have to make sure that some of these high issues are that things are stopped before they go into production. So more of those guardrails, if you will, than, these hard policies that we used to put in place and said, thou shall not pass unless you do X, Y, Z. And so I think
no.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, I was going to make the joke, we don't need any more Gandalf approach to security, yes. Right? But, and a lot of what you said too, I think is you haven't really, you mentioned tools, but it's more of the strategy of using the tools. It's just like developers don't just adopt one of those SCA or SaaS tools and suddenly they become DevSecOps. They do something strategic about the security culture. And I'm curious if you could tell us more. I love that approach, secure what you sell. Tell us a little bit more about what that means and why is that different from, sell us on this point. Why is that different from AppSec?
Yeah, so I think culture, to your point, is a big part of DevSecOps. I think that's really the foundation of it. It is a culture, it's a mindset, and then it becomes a set of practices. And the tools, to your point, are, they're last on the list, right? Technology is always the easiest portion of any of this when you talk about people, process, and technology. I would say that the way I look at DevSecOps and I look at culture is really about how do you build trust between those teams. And how do you say for security, you can say to security, okay, now you're a partner to development. And you can say to development, you know what, now, security is going to be your partner, but now you're also responsible for the security of your code. It's easy to say those things, but it's very hard to put into practice. And the way you do it is you start having security as early on in the life cycle as possible. And I'm not talking about the tools to your point right now. I'm talking about the security team, the security engineers. Maybe you start inviting them to some really important design review meetings. When we talk about secure what you sell, we go up a level and we invite security to the requirements gathering meeting. The security is now working with the product management team to get in early on. And the reason it's important to have the security team involved so early is that they can call out, some important items that are much harder to fix later on. For example, if you're talking about using containers, you as a company maybe haven't used containers before in production, maybe just use them in development. If you don't know what that security landscape is, you might just start deploying things, and there could be some security issues in that. In those containers that had security been involved early on, they could say, wait a minute, we know these are common issues. Don't run it as root, right? Yeah, you're going to do that maybe during development, but before it goes into production, simple things, having things like data, like what is the data, you're going to add a new feature that's going to collect some customer data. Whoa, let's talk about that. What is the data like? What do we have to worry about with those data requirements? When it comes to authentication and authorization, let's face it, nobody wants to go into production with an authentication library and then have to rip it out because security finds something late in the life cycle. So having that information up front, and really, I think having them early in the life cycle starts building that trust. So when something does come up, because something will always come up, you have that trust together, whether that's an issue is discovered in production, instead of having everybody kind of sit there and security be like, well, that was development's fault, or development being like, security is responsible for security. You can really start having that culture. And that kind of goes back to what we saw with DevOps, right? DevOps is about the culture. It's about, collaboration, communication, always trying to be learning from failure, not, pointing the finger. And I think DevSecOps kind of brings a lot of that up versus, to your point, this shouldn't be a tooling discussion. Yeah, tools are important. Automation is important, but this should be more about the culture you have in your organization.
And part of that too, then, talking about things that shouldn't be versus should be, is I like those examples you gave of don't run the container as root, or these are design choices that are harder to unwind further down the development and implementation SDLC, which is, I think, an important nuance that gets lost. Let's just find the vulns earlier because it's cheaper to fix them. I think that's even based on an old IBM study that was kind of a little bit napkin math and made up as it was. But it's also nice just to not be talking about what's the volume of vulns we found, how are we fixing them faster, which is, once again, just that vuln-centric mentality of AppSec. So I'm curious, as we talk about this approach, this collaboration, are there ways to measure that or align to be able to say we're in early stages, we're maturing in this way, or there's a framework to follow? How can someone know that I'm doing DevSecOps right, or that I'm being successful?
Yeah, doing DevSecOps. So do we have a time for a quick story? I want to just.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. So I don't think I mentioned, Mike or John, that in September I had the opportunity to go to the Rugby World Cup. I went to a couple games, never been to a rugby match before. Super exciting, so different than American football. It took me forever to learn the rules. You can kick the ball forward, but you can't throw the ball. That's just, I still don't get that. And the game is so fast. And some of the things I was like, wait a minute, why are they kicking the ball out of bounds on purpose? Are they tired? I didn't get that. But my favorite part, I have to say, my favorite thing to watch was the no-look pass. Have you ever seen rugby players do that? It's phenomenal when they do it. I'm running down the field with the ball. I mean, obviously it would be me. And, I've got opposition is coming towards me. They're all around me, right? And I just shove the ball off like that, and my teammate is there to catch it. Can you imagine how much planning, how much preparation, and how much trust goes into me not even looking and just throwing it, knowing my teammate is going to be there to catch it, and my teammate knowing, hey, she's in this, she's surrounded by all these folks. I got to be ready to catch this ball. To me, that's DevSecOps. To me, that is, security shouldn't have to look at every single issue. They shouldn't have to be in, the you shall pass. They shouldn't have to sit there saying, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do that. They have to be able to trust their teammates. And developers have to be ready. They have to be there to catch it. They have to know that it is part of their responsibility to get it. And so if you want to know if you're doing DevSecOps, it's that trust that has been built up between the teams. It's the ability to do the no-look pass. And, if you want hard measurements, employee surveys are the best way to do it. And in DevOps, we saw this happen where the NPS scores on employee happiness, employee experience, all went up with DevOps. The same thing happens with DevSecOps, right? Nobody wants to fight with security that they have to fix an issue. Why is this a vulnerability? Why is that not a vulnerability? If you're a security person, you've had to answer 100 times why this is an issue. If you're a developer, you've had to ask 100 times, why did the tool find this? It shouldn't have, No. DevSecOps means that we trust each other. We work together. We, again, with that rugby analogy, we all scrum and try to get together across the finish line. And we do that no-look pass by building trust. And so there are ways you can measure that, by team experience and happiness. But if you were to ask somebody on the team, are you happier now that you're doing DevSecOps? I don't think I've ever heard of anybody say no.
There's two things though there. I think I really love that concept of the NPS scores. But at the same time, I think I've blogged about this, can't remember, but the idea of definitely computer, I'd say software development in general, but computer security in particular to a good degree, we don't practice, right? So if you think about a lot of fields out there, I make analogies with the woodworking. If I hand you a saw and I say cut a very straight piece off this board, you're not going to do it unless you practice. It takes the muscle memory. And I think that happens in a lot of other areas of engineering and definitely operations in general. But it feels like, we might take a class on this stuff or listen to a podcast, whatever else, but how often do people actually practice to get that teamwork, right? That happens from weeks and weeks and weeks of practice also. And it's, I don't know, I never expect people to say, okay, say we're going to be practicing not doing, input validation or doing input validation. Have you seen anything around that of people thinking about how can we intentionally get better at this without the actual day-to-day, outside of the day-to-day coding?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think that continuous learning aspect is something that's built into DevSecOps. And so to your point, what is continuous learning? It takes different forms. One form might be, hey, we found XYZ. It's a big deal. It's in production. It's something we could have prevented, right? It's something we have control of. Let's go back and let's have a blameless retrospective on it. Let's talk about why. And then once we talk about why, what can we do in the future? And so that's when you get the team to elicit things from each other. I think we should do this. I think we could do that. That's one way. Another way I think that we see a lot of is there are some developers who enjoy learning more about security. And this kind of comes up a lot when we talk about Developer Security Champions program, which I know, Sandy maybe has come on and talked to you guys about, but really this idea that you want to harness the people who are interested in this to kind of be the champions that bring it to the everyday aspect of the team, right? They're the ones that maybe they take maybe they learn a little bit more about what SQL injection is, or maybe they understand a little bit better what secure coding patterns are. And they're part of the team to say, they have this connection with the security team as well, where they say, hey, wait a minute, we're about to do X, Y, Z. Should we take a step back? Should we invite security to this meeting? Because security can't be in every meeting. Or maybe they say, hey, I see that, you keep doing the same error over and over again. Maybe let me just show you how to fix, how you can write a parameterized, if you do write parameterized queries from the beginning, it'll solve a lot of your problems. So I think there's different ways that continuous learning can take this form. I think Developer Security Champions programs is one of them, making sure that you learn from failure. And then I think experimentation still comes up. And that means that you have to give the teams the ability to learn, and actually maybe they want to try a new process. Maybe they want to practice, to your point. Maybe they want to, add, maybe whether it's a tool or whatever it is that they think is important. And that you need to give time for. And I don't think we do that. As a product manager, we would talk about the amount of roadmap to tech debt and developers wanting to try a new framework or whatever. And a lot of times I try to squeeze as much as the developer and tech debt down as I could because I wanted to get roadmap out. But I think if you are a DevSecOps oriented company, as a product manager, you know that development and security need time to work together. They need time to, experiment with whether it's new technology or new ways of doing things. And so I think to me, it all kind of goes back to continuous learning.
I like that phrasing too, because everything you described did fit in well with what you were explaining about DevSecOps and that collaboration. For example, I've never seen one of those blameless postmortems, which do require trust, but someone go in and when they ask, why did this happen? They say, well, we didn't fix that. We only fixed that in 13 days instead of 7. Nobody ever talks about how quickly they fixed that particular vuln. They ask, why did that vuln happen in the first place? Why did we miss a signal? Why did we miss this? Which all seem really interesting things that you are also highlighting what a security champion could do, or what that security team can do, rather than making the security champion just the one responsible for, here we're missing the SLA on fixing the vulns, or the security champion will triage the vulns. So really, I there's not a question here yet. This is more just a very heartfelt thank you for pointing out all these other ways that actually people could do security well. And let's not even talk about the vulns anymore. Let's get beyond. Let's write the code. Let's secure what we sell rather than just sell more security scanning.
Yeah, and I actually have I've been talking to some developers, development managers, security, et cetera, about DevSecOps. I've did some interviews, and one dev manager gave me this amazing example. They are a company that I think epitomizes DevSecOps and the culture and the trying to do continuous learning. They said there was an issue where in production repo, where some sensitive information got out, and it shouldn't have, right? And so they got together, they had to figure it out. They got everybody together, let's talk about it, let's figure it out. And they made it in such a way that, they could say, well, somebody could be like, well, wait a minute, maybe I think it's this or what have you. And they weren't defensive. And what they decided to do was they already had tests and scanning to find as much information as they could or what have you. But they looked at this issue and they said, we could take the developer who made this mistake, who checked in this code that had the sensitive information in it, and we could put them through security awareness training. And we could say, don't you ever do that again, and make them feel very bad about themselves. Or they said, or what we could do is we could make this an awareness moment, a way to say, hey, everyone, let's just remember that let's not, do these things, and let's try and put in some tools in place, some guardrails to help the next developer new developers come on all the time, right? New people join. Maybe they didn't get that hey, you were a bad person for doing that talk. And, it's putting that guardrail in place to help them just catch it, to say, wait a minute, you're about to check this in. You're doing this. Are you sure you want to do that? And I think that's how we change the conversation. And I love that example because it used a blameless retrospective. Instead of, saying you're bad person who did this, it's saying, how do we change the environment? How do we change the system so that in the future, we can help people make better decisions? Because at the end of the day, that's what it's about.
It totally is. And it's like, why frame your own security awareness training as punishment? Like, that doesn't help anyone. You're setting yourself up for failure. It's like, well, I got to go get my punishment today. It's the time about phishing and input validation. It doesn't seem very smart. Janet, I know we were talking about the scrums. I love that story. We're going to take, the no look pass, and we can't have metrics around, a number of broken noses, a number of missing teeth to see how successful we are. But you've given us some good ideas on different ways to measure this, an approach to DevSecOps. I'm curious if there's maybe another conversation you had, if another anecdote, or just those stories you've been having, those discussions you've had with developers about even what do they ask for help? Like, I wish security would help us with X. Do you hear that phrase?
I think it comes down to, I hear more of what they don't want. So I don't want to have to spend, and this is a real thing that just happened not long ago with one company. The security said, hey, put in a bunch of issues in the backlog. You've got all these vulnerabilities, you need to go fix them. The developer spent 2 days trying to go through and say, okay, well, this vulnerability, how are we impacted? And do you know how many they were impacted by? 0. Their code was not impacted by any of them. So what does that do? That loses trust between security and development. And so this is where security is going to have to say, hey, we want to prioritize the ability to make sure that, whether it's the tools that you use that focus on prioritization or reachability, like really is your application really using this, focus on those types of tools, really being more of a partner in this versus, tossing it over the fence. So I would say I hear more about what they don't want to do. And I think when it's working well, what I hear from security is, which was really interesting in the customer references that I did for both the software composition analysis and the SaaS wave, I heard from the security folks, I don't get questions anymore about why is this a vulnerability? Developers aren't pushing back on me and saying, hey, this isn't an issue, that isn't an issue. They're just fixing things. And I think that goes to, if you make sure you're only putting in front of developers what's the most important thing, and you're not trying to show them everything, and you give them the tools, they will trust, they'll start building up trust, and they'll just, if it's something that's a big deal, they will fix it as part of it, because nobody wants to be the person that checks in insecure code. Like no developers out there be like, maybe there's a couple, I'm sure there are malicious actors out there, but like, I'm going to just code a bunch of bugs today, like that's not a thing, right? And so I think trying to harness people's, what they care about their code, harnessing that and making that a good thing and a motivator, I think is very important.
So, Janet, are you saying so? This has been a really interesting conversation, but I think one of the takeaways for me is: are you saying that we finally found the right top 10 list for developers to be able to be secure?
No.
Oh gosh, that would be lovely, but no, I don't think we've gotten. I think we've got important things, right? I think we know open libraries are a big deal that we didn't really think about as much before, but I wish there was a one top 10 list to rule them all. That would be fantastic.
Working
on it. Well, and speaking of things that security doesn't want to do, I don't want to have to let you go, Janet, but we are running out of time. But before we let you go, we've been asking all of our guests this year to describe AppSec in 3 words. And this is your first chance to let us know what your response to that is. So what have you got for us?
So the way I think about AppSec in 3 words is DevSecOps builds trust. So I hope that is something that people can embrace, the culture. It builds the trust, and it helps to make sure that we're more secure.
I love it. And once again, a very new one and a phrasing that we haven't heard at all before. But I think you've built a very good case for why that is. So thank you, Janet, for joining us.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, John.
Thank you, John, as well. Thank you, everyone, for listening to us. Also, check out episode 213 back from September 21st, 2022 to hear more from Janet. And right now, we are going to take a quick break and return with news of the week.